The restaurant glowed warmly that evening, filled with soft golden lighting that reflected gently off polished wooden tables. The air carried the rich smell of grilled food and fresh bread, while quiet music played somewhere in the background. It was supposed to be a pleasant night, the kind families looked forward to during busy weeks. We had gathered there to celebrate my husband's birthday. Everyone seemed relaxed and cheerful when we first arrived. Waiters moved between tables with trays of drinks, and conversations blended together into a comfortable hum. Our family sat around a large table near the center of the room. My husband sat proudly at the head while relatives joked and laughed around him. Across from me sat my daughter Emma. She wore a soft blue dress that suited her perfectly, but something about her expression caught my attention. Her smile seemed forced, like someone trying to appear happy while carrying a heavy thought. Beside her sat her husband Daniel. Daniel leaned comfortably back in his chair, one arm resting along the back as if the entire room belonged to him. His father sat beside him, already telling loud stories and laughing in a booming voice that drew attention from nearby tables. The two men shared the same confident manner, the same loud humor, and the same habit of dominating every conversation. At first, everything felt normal. Plates of food arrived, drinks were poured, and everyone raised their glasses for a toast. My husband thanked everyone for coming, and laughter filled the air again. Emma smiled politely and clinked her glass with the others, though I noticed she barely took a sip. As dinner continued, Daniel began making small comments toward her. "You're not eating again," he said casually while cutting his steak. "Trying to stay perfect?" Emma glanced down at her plate and gave a small smile. "I'm just not very hungry." Daniel smirked slightly. "You're always not hungry." His father chuckled and leaned back in his chair. "Women worry too much about appearances," he said loudly. Emma nodded faintly, though she looked uncomfortable. She picked at her food with her fork, but didn't take a bite. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling forming in my chest. Couples teased each other sometimes. Maybe I was just being overly protective. But as the evening continued, Daniel's remarks became sharper. "She forgot my jacket today," he suddenly told the table. "I had to go back inside the house to get it." Emma looked embarrassed. "I said I was sorry." Daniel shrugged. "You forget things all the time." A few people laughed awkwardly, unsure how to react. Emma forced another small smile, but I could see tension building in her shoulders. She kept twisting the edge of her napkin between her fingers. After a while, Daniel leaned closer to her and whispered something quietly. I couldn't hear what he said, but Emma immediately shook her head. "Stop," she whispered softly. "What?" Daniel said louder, raising his eyebrows. "I said stop," she repeated. Instead of dropping the subject, Daniel suddenly reached out and grabbed a handful of her hair. The movement was so sudden that no one reacted at first. He pulled it sharply. Emma gasped in pain as her head jerked backward. The sound seemed to echo through the room. Daniel released her hair a second later and leaned back in his chair as if nothing unusual had happened. Emma quickly lowered her head, trying to fix her hair. Tears filled her eyes almost instantly. Then Daniel's father burst out laughing. "That's how it's done," he shouted proudly. People at nearby tables turned to stare. "She needs to learn her place," he continued. Emma's hands trembled as she wiped tears from her cheeks. Daniel calmly picked up his glass and took a sip. The restaurant had grown strangely quiet. My heart began pounding harder with every passing second. I looked at my daughter sitting there humiliated in front of strangers, trying to pretend everything was fine. And suddenly something inside me snapped. I pushed my chair back slowly. The scraping sound cut through the silence. Then I stood up, and every eye in the restaurant turned toward me. The room felt heavier the moment I stood. Conversations at nearby tables faded away until the restaurant became strangely quiet. I could feel dozens of eyes watching our table, waiting to see what would happen next. Emma kept her head lowered, trying to hide the tears running down her cheeks. Her hands trembled as she tried to smooth her hair back into place. It broke my heart to see her like that. Daniel, however, looked completely unconcerned. He leaned back in his chair again and crossed his arms, as though the moment meant nothing. "What?" he said casually. "It was a joke." His father laughed loudly and lifted his glass. That's how wives should be handled, the older man said proudly. Emma whispered weakly, please stop. But neither man seemed to care. The sound of my footsteps was quiet as I walked around the table. I stopped beside Daniel's chair. He looked up at me with a faint smirk. What? He asked again. Without warning, I grabbed the front of his expensive suit jacket and pulled him halfway out of his chair. Gasps spread through the restaurant. His drink tipped over, spilling across the tablecloth. Don't you ever touch my daughter like that again, I said through clenched teeth. Daniel struggled slightly as he steadied himself. Have you lost your mind? His father shouted, jumping to his feet. I turned slowly toward him. No, I said calmly. I'm the woman who raised the girl you just humiliated. Daniel straightened his jacket angrily. You're making a scene, he snapped. I looked directly into his eyes. You already made one. Emma's voice trembled behind me. Mom, please. But the damage had already been done. The entire restaurant was watching. And I wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. Daniel tried to laugh as if everything was under control. You're overreacting, he said while adjusting his collar. But I could see irritation flickering behind his confident expression. His father stepped closer, clearly furious. You don't speak to my son like that, the older man said sharply. I faced him calmly. Your son just grabbed my daughter by the hair in public. He scoffed loudly. She's his wife. Those words sent a cold wave through my chest. Emma sat silently, staring down at the table. Her shoulders looked smaller than I had ever seen them. I walked over and gently placed my hand on her shoulder. She flinched. That tiny reaction said more than words ever could. How long? I asked quietly. Emma didn't answer. Daniel sighed impatiently. Oh, please, he said. Don't start drama. I turned toward him again. You think humiliating her is funny? It was nothing, he replied. His father crossed his arms proudly. In our family, wives respect their husbands. I looked around the restaurant. People were whispering quietly now, clearly shocked by what they had witnessed. Then I looked back at Emma. Her silence felt heavy in the air. And suddenly a terrible realization formed in my mind. This wasn't the first time. Not even close. And if I didn't stop it now, it might never stop at all. I slowly sat down beside Emma and gently placed my hand over hers. Her fingers were cold and trembling, and she kept her eyes fixed on the table as if she hoped the world around her would disappear. The restaurant remained quiet. People were still watching, whispering softly among themselves, but none of that mattered to me anymore. Emma, I said softly. She didn't respond. I squeezed her hand gently. Look at me. Slowly, she lifted her head. Tears had left faint lines down her cheeks, and her eyes looked tired in a way that no young woman's eyes should. Tell me the truth, I whispered. Her lips trembled slightly. Across the table, Daniel shifted impatiently in his seat. Oh, for heaven's sake, he muttered. Are we really doing this right now? I ignored him. Emma, I repeated gently. Does he treat you like this at home? Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment she looked frightened. Not of me, but of the question itself. Daniel suddenly leaned forward. That's enough, he said sharply. I turned to look at him. No, I replied calmly. It isn't. His father slammed his palm against the table. This is a private matter, the older man snapped. You're embarrassing the entire family. I met his gaze without flinching. My daughter was embarrassed the moment your son laid his hands on her. Emma's grip tightened around my hand. Her breathing became uneven. I looked back at her. You don't have to be afraid, I said quietly. Daniel scoffed loudly. She's not afraid, he said. You're just making things dramatic. But Emma still hadn't answered. The silence stretched for several seconds, heavy and painful. Then finally, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it, she said, sometimes. The word felt like a knife. Sometimes what? I asked gently. Emma swallowed. Sometimes he gets angry. Daniel pushed his chair back slightly. That's not what I meant, Emma said quickly, as if trying to fix the damage she had already done. But it was too late. Because in that moment I understood something that filled me with both heartbreak and rage. My daughter had been living with this fear for a long time. And none of us had noticed. 5. Daniel rubbed his temples as though the entire situation was exhausting him. "This is ridiculous," he said. "We came here to celebrate a birthday, not to start some family interrogation." But I wasn't listening to him anymore. I looked at Emma carefully. "Last week," I said quietly, "you had a bruise on your arm." Her eyes widened again. "You told me you hit the door." Emma's breathing became uneven. Daniel suddenly stood up. "That's none of your business," he said sharply. I stood as well. "She's my daughter," I replied. "And she's my wife," he snapped back. Emma looked between us nervously. "Please stop," she whispered. But neither of us did. Daniel's father leaned forward angrily. "You're poisoning her mind," he said. I turned toward him. "No," I said calmly. "I'm finally listening to it." Emma wiped her eyes with shaking fingers. "He didn't mean it," she said weakly. Daniel nodded quickly. "Exactly," he said. "Thank you." But Emma kept speaking. "He just gets angry sometimes." Her voice cracked as she said it. And that was the moment the truth became impossible to ignore. 6. I slowly turned to face the rest of the restaurant. People were pretending not to stare now, but everyone was still watching. "If we're all sharing jokes tonight," I said clearly, "maybe Daniel should explain the bruise Emma had last week." The room fell completely silent. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're crossing the line," he said. "No," I replied calmly. "You crossed it the moment you hurt her." His father looked furious. "This is disgraceful." Emma stood up slowly beside me. Her legs looked unsteady, but she remained standing. Daniel looked at her with disbelief. "You're seriously letting her do this?" he asked. Emma wiped her tears again. "I didn't say anything," she whispered. "That's the problem," I said gently. "You shouldn't have to stay silent." 7. Daniel grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. "That's it," he said. "We're leaving." But when he tried to walk past me, I stepped directly into his path. "No," I said firmly. He stared at me. "You think you can stop me?" "I think someone should have stopped you a long time ago." His father turned toward the restaurant manager, who was approaching nervously. "This woman is causing a scene," the older man shouted. I looked around the room calmly. "No," I said. "I'm exposing one." Emma slowly moved closer to my side. Daniel noticed the movement and frowned. "What are you doing?" he asked her. Emma didn't answer. She just stood there beside me. And for the first time that night, she didn't look afraid. 8. I placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "Come home with me tonight," I said softly. Daniel laughed coldly. "She's not going anywhere." Emma looked at him. For several seconds, she didn't move. Then slowly, she stepped away from him. Gasps spread quietly through the restaurant. Daniel's father shook his head in disbelief. "You're destroying this family," he said. Emma looked at him calmly. "No," she replied softly. "You already did." Daniel looked stunned. It was the first time she had ever spoken to him like that. 9. Daniel's face darkened with anger. "You're embarrassing me," he snapped. Emma took a deep breath. "For years I stayed quiet," she said. The restaurant remained silent around us. But tonight, she continued, "I'm done." Daniel laughed bitterly. "You'll regret this." Emma shook her head. "No," she said. "I regret staying." The words seemed to echo in the room. For the first time, Daniel looked uncertain. Because the control he had relied on for so long was slipping away. 10. Emma and I walked slowly toward the restaurant door. Behind us, Daniel shouted angrily, but neither of us turned around. The cool night air felt refreshing as we stepped outside. Emma stopped beside the car and suddenly hugged me tightly. Her body was still shaking slightly. "I thought no one would ever stand up for me," she whispered. I held her close. "You never had to face this alone," I said. She pulled back slightly and looked at me. For the first time that night, there was strength in her eyes instead of fear. Inside the restaurant, Daniel and his father remained sitting at the table in stunned silence. Their power over her had ended the moment she chose to walk away. Emma took a deep breath and looked up at the night sky. "I feel lighter," she said softly. I smiled. "Because you're finally free." And as we drove away from the restaurant lights, I knew that moment would be remembered forever. Not as the night my daughter was humiliated, but as the night she finally reclaimed her life.